Hi everybody, this is Joe, the CEO of LILA Movement Technology and the creator of the Exigent Wearable Resistance Technology. As promised, we're launching our very first sport-specific practical series today with sprinting. We're going to be walking through over the next hour the application of wearable resistance into the world of sprinting. Just to say from the start, I work with high-level sprinters and sprint coaches around the planet, and I know one thing, everybody's got a little bit of their own idea on what constitutes the most important things in sprinting or technique. This is not a lecture or a webinar on sprinting. That's up to you. We're talking to you about engaging and using the product. If you see something you agree with or don't agree with, that's great. I actually think just keep that to yourself and focus on, we're trying to educate you and bring you a level of knowledge and understanding of what it's like to put resistance into that. You can tweak it for your program, apply it the way you want. Focus on what we're doing and not on what we're not doing. So this is not a sprint coaching session. Just make that very clear. In this day and age of social media, I almost think we have to make sure people understand what we're trying to message here. So this is about putting light resistance with wearable resistance technology, Exigent, into the sprinting program. And we're going to focus on key problems that arguably are some of the most common issues that you see in sprint technique. And it doesn't matter whether that's with a track athlete or a field sport athlete like a footballer or American gridiron player or lacrosse. A lot of it's really the same. And again, you can judge that if you're a high-level sprint coach or a conditioning specialist on where and how that might apply to the athletes you have. My job today is to try and give you a little bit of insight in how wearable resistance relates to these technical issues. So again, what is wearable resistance? Really quick, light resistance applied to the body via clothing, and you're not concerned about transference because you're training it in your sport. You're not trying to transfer it from a general setting to a specific setting. LVRT, this is our signature education certification program. Our courses are all recognized by Auckland University of Technology, and the level 1 LBRT is a separate course. This is a short course. Light variable resistance training is the focus on resistance training with wearable resistance, keyword being light, 2 being variable because of the need to be able to progress, individualize, specify, and all the laws that apply. A couple of major things that apply with LBRT is less than 10% of loading, and you're putting it into movement and skill and technique, not just muscle adaptation for speed, power, strength. General guidelines on LBRT. First and foremost, the user defines the range of motion, not the equipment. Loading is for a skill, is usually less than about 1% of body weight. Overall, if you're using it even for conditioning in sport, less than 10% of body weight. Progressions are in grams and ounces, not kilograms and pounds. Movement speeds need to be maintained at or near competition speeds, and we generally say as a guideline, not less than 10% of your target speed for competition. Really minimal disruption to specific skill. Hands and feet must remain free because of the need for high sensitivity in these areas. And it's used in your sport or the actual competition environment. And again, saying it again, wearable resistance is another tool. It's a very powerful tool, but it's just a tool in your toolbox. It doesn't replace traditional resistance training, which of course is more the ground-based stuff and heavier loading that we do in a gym setting, or functional work that we do in more static areas for stability and whatnot. So knowing your tool, and what we're talking about today is putting that tool into speed.
Kiwi sprinter Joseph Miller has already proved he's fast. Now he's turned to some unique training aids in his quest to become the first New Zealander to break the 10-second barrier for the 100 metres, even putting a modern-day twist on some medieval technology. Joseph Miller has started wearing a suit to work, but this is far from your average business suit.
Can look very medieval at times. I'm walking around with some armour on.
It's called EXOGEN, and Kiwi sports scientists are some of the first in the world to try it out. It gives a whole new meaning to the idea of bodyweight training. Each of these panels weighs 200 grams. It's made up of small bits of metal, so it moves a bit like chainmail. It's got a Velcro back, meaning the athlete can place it on exactly whichever muscle they want to get the resistance.
If you try to carry a dumbbell or a barbell whilst doing this stuff, it wouldn't work out so well.
Coach Dr. Paul Gamble is using the suit to increase Miller's stride. He can already move his legs quickly, but if he learns to push further with every step, he'll cover distance faster.
having them as short so I can actually work on lifting my knees as well as, you know, standing up tall and having all that going. It's just a really good transfer into exactly what I want it to be doing.
Usain Bolt takes the concept of a long stride to the extreme. While Miller will never keep up with him in those stakes, it's thought this kind of training will get him running 100 metres in under 10 seconds. The weight suit is being combined with a form of resistance training that's been developed for a PhD program.
We can't show you, or we could, but then I'd have to kill you.
The results aren't quite a secret.
I'm doing training reps I was doing at the peak of last winter, faster, same amount of distance, all that sort of thing.
Going the extra mile is already paying off.
So it's a nice little clip from New Zealand News on Joseph Miller. Joseph Miller is NZ's fastest man, one of them. He's when he started with us, he was running about 10.38, and with the help of Exigent, in about an 8-12 month period, we dropped that to about 10.18. Now, of course, a lot of that credit, sprint programs are multifactorial, right? There's a lot going on. But Exigent provided a clear boost, and both his coach, Paul Gamble, there, and Joseph made a distinct note on the value of Exigent in helping to reduce that time. And like he said, I'm doing training reps higher, everything's higher. And to be honest, that's what you'd expect, because it's weight training going into your sport. And what do you think happens after you've added a lightweight into your movement and then you take it off? And you've done that for 2, 3, 5, 6, 8 months. You're faster, you're better at what you're doing. Question is not so much does it work, because that now is answered. And if you have a problem with that, go online and listen to more of the people using it. What we're trying to do now is understand, well, how do I make it work for me? In what situation? Because sprinting is technical. So what if you've got a rotation issue versus a hip engagement issue versus a striding issue? We know weight training works. What we're trying to do now is not prove that. We're trying to figure out how does it work in real high-speed movement. And he used that keyword, transference. So again, you didn't see him in the gym working on just conditioning or coordination or plyometric drills. They're using it on the track. So the product's pretty basic. Comes with everything you need, and this is not a product education seminar, but you do need to understand that. You get your specific piece of kit, whether it be the shorts, the calves, the top. Different sports, different activities have different needs. You don't have to have a whole suit. But what's really important is you get these loads, and loads come in different sizes, from 50 grams or 2 to 4 ounces, all the way up to 300 grams or 12 ounces. It's very light, very micro thin, and those are the pieces that become really important when you start to get into how do you periodize and load with the product. So speaking of the loads, it is really critical to understand what these loads do. We call them fusiform loads because we followed fusiform pination and muscle pination in the design. Now, again, there's a lot to that, but what you really see is our load actually has a belly and an insertion, and the patents are based on this design for a number of reasons, because this is the design that has an application. With that belly, most of the load is in that position, whereas the tail tapers and there's partial load out here, which means we can disperse load over the body, but still have an emphasis of load in a specific area. And so pay attention to that design, because it's going to be critical when we start walking through the how to load in different aspects of sprint mechanics. As it said there, all movement is rotational. Outcomes may be linear, but they're a result of a summation of rotational actions. One of the things that was really exciting with some of the PhD work we've got going on around the world was when we first started measuring Exigent in a traditional sprint format, we were measuring linear kinematics, and we were not seeing things in terms of linear force, linear speeds in the way we thought we would, but we were seeing faster times, and we were seeing enormous response from the athletes in things like RPEs and exertion. I mean, we're seeing 20 to 40% increases in RPE with 100-gram loads on a sprinter's legs. So we knew something was happening, but the linear capture wasn't showing it until we quickly realized, and the team at AUT really went through the science of this, it's the rotational load that's applying here. And that's where the effect is being felt and understood by the athlete, and that's where the outcome is showing up in terms of the performance. And this, like you said, you know, we've gone back and rethought the way we're even looking at sprinting now with this emphasis on rotation. And when you see our next webinar series, really pay attention to John's section That's Dr. John Cronin, the head of research at AUT, when he goes through the science of rotational inertia and momentum and different loading positions and patterns with Exigent. And a simple scenario that everybody really gets is the wheel weight on a car, okay? So your body piece, whatever it is, a limb segment, a forearm, a calf, lower shank, it's rotating. And it's rotating at a certain amount of degrees per second, like a car wheel. And when you take a 30 kilogram or 50, 60 pound car tire, and you take a very small, that's out of balance, all it takes is a 5, 10, 15 gram weight to put that thing into right balance or make it worse. Something spinning at very high speed just needs a subtle tweak to really make a big difference in fine-tuning it. And the outcome is enormous in terms of gas mileage, wear and tear on the tire, feel, shake, whatever it might be. And so what we're learning with Exigent and wearable resistance in movement is we now have the power for the very first time to apply this very light load into tweaking movement. So it's not just about saying how much load's on the body, we're going to do running drills and it'll be harder. It's about tweaking movement, and today's presentation is really about that. And I want you to think about that because this has been the most important finding in the whole 17 years that I've been working on this, and certainly from our research side, and that is where you put load in real sport movement is more important than how much load. And so we're really trying to move away from how much should I use, how much should I use. I can tell you today in this whole lecture, we're not going to be talking about more than 100 to 400 grams. So put the big loading thought away and think about tweaking for improving performance. And have a little look at this clip here. It sort of highlights rotations. I think a lot of you have maybe seen this clip before. It's a great slow motion sprint clip right off YouTube. Now ask yourself, how many rotations can you see happening? And at the first start of the movement, the rotation changes by the time he starts into that second step already. So he's moving in a linear direction, but rotations are happening everywhere. And again, we're going to be talking about sprinting and the rotations in various parts of the body that affect sprinting and how tweaking it with light loading can really improve that technique. And then again, now we're looking at high speed. And this is really hard to train. And this is why transfers from traditional resistance training is sometimes very limited to a high-speed movement. We can work on force output, but when you put it into a very specific movement or at a very specific time or phase in the race, we're talking about a different ballgame. So, planted in your mind now, rotations. Let's talk a little bit about tweaking rotations in movements for speed. Comes back to just reminding you, now we come back to that belly. So like I said, you've got this load, all right? And that load has a belly, and that load has a tail. So we can disperse load over the body so it's not felt as too heavy. And then the second point is that arrow. Where that belly goes is where movement's gonna go. So if that belly's on the inside of the body, it's gonna help rotate that on the inside. If that belly's on over the back, it's going to pull shoulders back. So concentrate where you put that belly. The physical inertia when you start moving and rotating is going to move the body or emphasize the feeling in that direction. So let's get into it now. So one of the things we've developed and discovered is the biomechanics of movement loading. And we've got a new way to think about loading on the body. And there's 6 primary load orientations. And a load orientation means, where can I put this on the body? This load can fit in a number of places, anatomical positions, and each one of them is felt and experienced and has a different outcome. And it's incredible, really. So if you just take a look at a calf, and that's what we're doing here. If I move a load around the calf or up or down in different diagonals, on that same shank, yes, it's all the calf, but subtle changes in that position have enormous feeling changes in the perception of the athlete using it. And it's not hard to figure out. A single session puts that to light because you feel it immediately. But we'll walk through right now these load orientations and what they mean and where we generally tend to use them. So first, what loading we talk about is proximal and distal, okay? You can see there, proximal, obviously being to the near the rotating joint. For the lower leg, the rotating joint is the knee, all right? Distal means away from the joint. So your belly is near the joint, your belly is away from the joint, proximal and distal. The other way to do it is you can actually put the whole weight proximal and the whole weight distal. But one simple thing happens. You know your lever systems. You move that load down that lever system, and what happens? Feels heavier further away from the rotation point, feels lighter closer to the rotation point. And a small load is experienced very quickly, very different. So a proximal load, it feels lighter and it is easier, all right? And we use it in high-speed training. If we want to keep the terminal velocity very high and the feeling through the foot or the hand soft, we load at the knee. Also, we start there in the beginning because it's less stress to get that going because the load is proximal, less movement or force is needed to overcome inertia. Now you move that distally. What do you think happens? Put it out there at the end of the limb, it's going to feel heavier. It's going to feel harder. And we emphasize that a lot more when you're looking at a strength, a specific strength and a specific power issue. Oftentimes, another way to think about this is we're punching with our combat athletes. People that are looking for knockout power are loading more distally. They really want a strong terminal feeling and force at the end of that punch. But if they're looking for speed, they'll often load proximally because it's quick and the terminal movement is very soft. So the first orientation's a proximal versus a distal load. And it's the same on any segment of the body, including the trunk. The next two positions are simple, anterior and posterior. Do we load on the front of the body or do we load on the back of the body? And again, on the same piece of the body, if it's a calf, you've got a small object here, a little guy, loading it on the front of the leg and the back of the leg, it's a massive difference. And very simply, in the back of the body, you immediately feel the posterior chain engaged, your glutes, hams, and calves. Put that load on the front, although it's the same segment, you'll feel the anterior chain engaged, your flexors, quads, anti-tip, and tip. You'll notice that when you go into your movement, whatever it is, you'll feel those muscles starting to work. And the fifth and sixth one is internal and external. And internal and external simply means putting that towards the midline or away from the midline or on the outside of the body. And that has a tremendous effect specifically on rotations. When it's internal, all right, the belly is pointing to the inside. And what do you expect? Like the arrow shows there, that leg is going to want to rotate in as it swings through range of motion, whether that swing is a kick, a flutter kick, a run cycle, a cycling cycle, whatever movement it is, it's going to have a feeling to rotate in. And of course, laterally, it's going to have the opposite. You put it on the outside, that foot's going to want to come out. So you take a look at people with a valgus or varus knee or certain types of mechanics in the lower leg that we can work on specifically. And when we talk about trunk rotations, remember your internal and external. So again, 6 loading orientations, biomechanical terms you've understood, but now apply to wearable resistance. Proximal and distal position, anterior posterior position, and medial and lateral position. So some of the questions we get, and you probably have now, are, well, how do you load a sport movement? Okay, we understand loading squats. We understand loading kettlebells. We understand loading a ground-based power clean or extension movement. But how do I load the transition in, let's talk about sprinting 100 meter. How do I load from early acceleration to top speed? That's a 2-second transition period. How do you load for that? And those are real questions. And those are the questions that have more technical value to a coach than increasing my squat by 10 kilos. And then how do you load that and where do you load that? And what about for skill? Because the big question we always get it, will it disrupt skill? And then the last point is always, is it dangerous? You know, loading, whether you're talking about traditional resistance training or you're talking about light wearable resistance, everybody's worried about injury. So let's answer some of those questions for you now. Okay, most important, remember, wearable resistance is resistance training. We know resistance training works, all right? And the normal opposing forces that work on the body still apply. Gravity, friction, centrifugal, and rotational inertia momentum. If you understand where the force is coming from, you can understand where to load it. And that's where we say the second point there. If you want to know where to apply a load to the body during movement, first you got to understand from where the resistance is coming from. So go back to that picture of that sprinter coming out of that block. The body's starting to accelerate up, the arm's starting to accelerate back. Okay, what is the resistance to those movements? Is gravity the resistance? Does inertia start to become its own resistance if there's a change in direction? When you understand that, you start to understand Exigent's a resistance tool, so it's got to resist a movement. Where's the resistance coming from? Well, we're going to talk about that. The 2 points on mechanics and safety, I'm just going to say now. We're working with the best speed programs in the world, and primarily the first thing we're working with them with is on technical change, on improving skill. If you put the load in the wrong place, the beauty of it is anybody who moves knows what the right place feels like. And one of our primary guidelines is if the load feels wrong, reload it. That's the beauty of it. You can tweak position so quick and so fast that you don't have to get stuck with equipment that was uncomfortable, like traditional resistance training. The equipment adjusts to you. So will it disrupt mechanics if you put it in the wrong position and you don't know what it feels like? Possibly, but ultimately it's going to work your mechanics. So we're seeing it as a mechanical and a technical solution. Second, about injury, knock on wood, we don't have any injuries with it because people are following our safe loading guidelines. And that is something we'll go through at the end. It's really important you do that because it is resistance training, and resistance training done smartly and safely is safe. And you're not going to put 2 kilos on a leg on your first session, just like you wouldn't put 200 kilos on the squat bar in your first session. So make sure you follow all our safety guidelines available when you get the product and all over our material on YouTube and on the website and here in the presentation. Okay, now this is a really high level thought and point I've got to make here because it gets pretty technical, but it's actually pretty simple. Assistive versus resistive loading. A load ultimately can be in 2 positions, all right? And remember, in the dependent where the resistance to the body is in a movement. Now I've got a position here on the shoulder. So we're going to talk about posture, all right? If we take a look at poor posture where the shoulders are slumped and the shoulders down, and then we talk about good posture or corrective posture when we're trying to bring the shoulders back and we're focused on being tall. So one movement is resisting that, one movement is assisting that. And with loading, we can actually work on posture, and we do it. We do it with high-level athletes, and we do it with people in a functional setting who are just everyday people, from doctors to people with poor structural problems. Assisted loading means we put the load in a position, proximal, distal, anterior, posterior, doesn't matter. We put it in a position where the load helps physically correct the problem. Now, if you think of anybody who needs help with posture, and they're standing slumped like that, the first thing the trainer or somebody does is they literally come behind them, they put their hands on their shoulder, and they pull the shoulders back. They physically pull the shoulders back. So they become aware of it. Bring your posture back, bring your posture back. Well, that load is exactly doing that. That arrow, as it shows there, sorry, let me just go back. Okay, that arrow is not moving, but never mind, there it is. So that arrow is pulling that shoulder back. With that load back there and pull on the front, there's a bit of traction across the front, but it's subtle. And that's the thing, is this isn't heavy. It's not designed to do it once and aggressively. It's done to do it over time. And at the same point, make the person aware of it. That load hanging on the back is literally pulling that shoulder back. It may sound like, oh, I don't know if that works. But I can tell you it works. And the athlete feels it, and the person feels it immediately. And you don't need much load in everyday movement to actually make that change. So that would be an assistive load, where the load put on the body is correcting them. Now what happens though, it's a short-term solution, because the load is making the correction, not the person. When you take that load off, they haven't built resistance to the weakness. So we didn't put the load in the resisted point to make them stronger in the muscles that are needed to pull it back. We put the load as a compensation for the weak area. So you can put a load to assist the movement or resist it. And it is important to be able to assist movement, because some people don't even have the awareness of the issue. So when we put a load in a position to assist a movement, sometimes it's because we're working with somebody who doesn't even know how to pull their shoulders back. They don't even know how to physically do that themselves. So we put the load there so they create awareness, proprioception, better technique, and like the coach's hand putting them in the right position, it provides an intrinsic cue that works the issue because they don't know how to do it. But ultimately, you have to remember this. That's loading the correction, but people are not going to live their life with a load. And you know, you can buy all kinds of posture support where they say, oh, wear this all day. And it keeps you there, but it's not developing the muscles to make you self-correct. And that's where we focus on the resistive load, okay? So the resisted load does the exact opposite. It takes a problem, you've got a little bit of a slouch, you put that load on the body, it pulls that shoulder even more forward, and now they're being pushed into poor posture. And the natural response to being pushed in the wrong direction is to respond back. And now they're having to be aware that, wow, I need to use those muscles to specifically train my shoulders because that load wants to pull me forward, even more so than my normal bad posture. And so again, you have to understand the resistance. The resistance could be tight pecs, could be all those reasons. Guys, keep your sports science, I got to tell everybody what I know, mine's aside, and just listen. What I'm talking about is, if you push that down forward more, they've got a choice. They can sit in that position, or they can start to try and come out of that position. And what they don't do is they don't do reps. They're not going to sit there and go 1, 2, 3, 4. They're going to become aware of it constantly. And for a person running at high speed who has a posture issue, or a marathon runner who's getting postural issues, not in the first hour, maybe after 90 minutes with that load, they start to become very aware of the need to self-correct. And that's a long-term solution, all right? So you're placing the load in a position that exasperates the problem. It physically makes the problem worse. And it depends, resisted or assisted loading depends on the person. If you've got a high-level athlete that knows they're a bit weak, they can handle it, you can go right into loading that problem, and they're already pulling it back, and they're aware, I'm working on it in my specific sport. Might be with a racket in hand, might be with a golf club in hand, but they've got a high level of motor development, high level body awareness, and they just need the strengthening in that area. Somebody else where it's more of a motor problem and they don't even know what it feels like, you might start them with the assisted loading so they can just work on getting into the right position. But ultimately, you're going to have to go to resisted loading so that they self-correct, okay? Resisted loading provides a direct resistance to the weaker targeted muscles, like weight training, right? You want to work the bicep, you got to put it in a position where that bicep is going to be resisted, okay? If they don't know how to compensate that, you'd lift the arm. If they don't know how to lift the arm, you'd assist it. So it's like that in very specific movement. So resisted loading loads the problem. Assisted loading corrects the problem. And we'll talk about that now in the concepts of sprinting. And like I said, it's pretty high level stuff. Hopefully you get that. But remember, it literally just means, where do I want to put the weight to either help or make them develop their own? And we'll walk you through that now. So we're going to talk about 5 things in sprinting. I mean that. We're working with literally the best programs in the world. And even to this day, most of them are doing some level of this with some athlete. Shoulder posture is a big one. Torso rotation is a big one. Hip engagement, early acceleration, piston action, whatever you want to call it. And then, of course, overstriding is big. Understriding is a little less of an issue, but it does show up sometimes. So, shoulder posture. We kind of went through this already. Posture issue. Big problem with shoulder posture in sprinting is negatively affects the correct or tall running position. When an athlete either fatigues and collapses here, either late stage of a race, late stage of a game, or late stage of training. At any time when they start to get tired, people start to slouch. You see this a lot in endurance athletes. And of course, what happens? It pushes everything down, reinforces that sitting position, inefficiency goes out the window, you collapse the torso and the pelvis. And again, it's due to both weakness and it's due to fatigue. Either way, it's a problem. So our solution with that, and what we're doing with the athletes right now, is specifically working with the top. Exigent sleeveless top. You can see our model wearing that there. And again, you've got 2 loading patterns. The one at the top is showing a resistive load. And that 200 grams, 100 to 200 grams is the load you'll use. You're not going to be putting on a kilo. Again, the numbers on here are not accidental. And we'll get to that in a minute. So resistive load. If you have an athlete who is aware of their problem, they just need the strengthening on it, you can get into that resistive load quite quickly. And as soon as they feel that push down, they respond back. They're like, yeah, coach, I have to work to keep those shoulders up. I get it. And what do you think happens 4 weeks later when they take that off? The muscles are developed. There's a higher level of tone through the muscles in the rear, and they're able to hold that in a position, especially during their activity. If they are having a little bit of difficulty feeling it, they're not really sure, you want to get that coach's hand on them, but while they're actually running, then put the assistive load on. And that's the picture at the bottom. Put that load in there and they'll say, oh yeah, I can feel that pulling me back. And then you say, all right, well, let's take that load off now. And I want you to try and maintain that. We need to work against that. So awareness, the assistive load can help very well for 1 or 2 sessions to get them into that awareness, but it's not a long-term solution. Not a lot of speed athletes are going to want to load up during a race. We generally recommend, and these are the recommendations for all 5 of these, 3 to 4 times a week. There you can see that loading in the anterior and distal. Distal means for the trunk. Proximal is near the hip joint and the lower back. Distal is up high at the shoulder. All right. So getting an anterior load up high distal on the shoulder. This is a position for working that poor posture. And just so you know, if it's here or if it's here, if it's here, it's small differences. You can play with that. It's not like a right or wrong. The athlete will change it after once run. You'll start here as a coach and they'll say, I got to adjust it. The nice thing is strip it off, move it around. So a little tweaking is fine. We suggest you put it into your warm-up drills. For all speed activity, your warm-up and your coordination drills, your skip drills, that's your coordination exercise and your specific conditioning for the muscles of running. So start working on those correct issues right then. So have them use it once they get into a bit of their warm-up, get through their strides and start working on their skip movements. And might be the same even in team sport, is put that corrective load or put that resistive load into those activities during the warm-up. Then move into your main training drill. About 50% of your main training drill will also be with the load. Not all of it. It's really important to make sure they stay connected to the movement and you don't overburden them with the load. And what that means is, let's say, and I'm going to talk about a sprinter here. So let's say you've got a sprinter doing 6 sets of 120s. Okay, these are top speed or acceleration mechanics sets, and they're going to be 70 to 90%. You know, that might be the whole workup. So if you've got 6 of those, and then the athlete's going to be running them with X amount of rest, 5, 7 rests, 5, 6 minutes rest between sets. What you will do is their first rep unloaded. Let them connect to their movement. Then you load set 2, 3, 4. Okay, maybe 3 of those loaded, and then the last 1, 2, unload. And what happens is then they've got about 50% of their time will be loaded. They're going to work the problem, but you always finish unloaded in speed movements and all movement because you want them to reconnect to movement, and you're not just trying to beat them up, fatigue them. Light resistance training isn't weight training. They're not walking out of there dragging their butt after a hard leg day, but they should be challenged. And the focus is on movement quality. And we always say finish light. Anybody in a speed sport likes the feeling of speed. So you always want to let that be the last feeling they feel when they leave a training session so they come back motivated. Somebody leaves a training session feeling like crap, they do not come motivated for the next session the next day, especially highly sensitive athletes. Okay, and this is anybody who's worked with, say, EPL level or national or high level footballers, you know what I mean. But football, not American football, soccer, badminton, tennis, where you've got fine motor skill. So our general guideline is this: if you're 70 kilograms or 150 pounds or below, you're only going to use 1 to 200 grams on that shoulder. If you're 70 kilograms or 150s and above, and it's pretty generic, we've seen this across the world, you might use up to 300, 400 grams on that shoulder. But start light. You're not going to use more than that. It doesn't take a lot of load to start getting them away from their movement, and now it just becomes gym training. And again, feel and quality of movement. Look at that. If they're able to keep their quality of movement, but it's being challenged, then you know you've got the right load. And you should see them, like I said, you should see them challenged, but not struggling. She's an 11.5 sprinter. She's a national champion from Malaysia, so a good elite sprinter. She's loaded specifically on the top, volumes high. Cindy, how does that position feel? Different? Like, what does it make you feel? What's it doing?
I'm running like full flat, like sitting. Now I can feel like I'm pushing my body up.
So you actually can see that from your legs. You're having to push up.
Yes. I have to lift up my hip, Then I have to go like something you're putting me in front and up.
Oh, that's
Someone's
awesome.
pressing you down. You have to bring up your body.
So it's doing exactly what we hoped it would.
Yes.
You want to leave it right in that
Yeah.
position then?
Yes.
Cool.
Because normally I'm running like sitting and then I'm not like pushing my hip. So when I'm wearing this, I can feel like I'm pushing my hip and lift up my body.
Cool. You like it?
Yeah, I like it.
Awesome.
It's comfortable.
Good, good. Well, I think he's going to do one or two more.
Okay, this is the exciting part. The term she's using, she's not talking about strength training. She's not in the gym. She's talking about movement terms. And so she can feel that. And she's got 200 grams on each shoulder. She's quite strong, so we loaded her a little heavy. And she said, my problem is I sit, but now I have to push up. And remember where posture comes from. It doesn't just come from the shoulders. That's a very basic answer. It comes from the push from the hip. And so you see how technical that got very quickly. It's reinforcing the overall posture, which isn't as simple as just the shoulder collapsing. And she got that. That was her first session. She knew what it was doing. She could feel what it was doing, and the athletes understand that immediately. And so, like I said, you get that kind of high-level feedback, knowing where the resistance is. She's like, somebody's pushing me down. So it's doing all the things we want it to do. And she said, it's pulling me forward, pushing me down. I have to stand tall. I have to lift my hip. I have to think about running tall. Okay. Okay, so next one. We're just going to move straight into rotation. Another big area. A lot of athletes move side to side. Generally, it's too much or over rotation. There's a lot of reasons. Core muscle weakness, especially at high speed, is when people break down. For some of you conditioning specialists, we do a lot of stuff in the gym that's static or lightly dynamic, like FMS and whatnot, and then we say, oh yeah, they're stable in that, they're good, they're fine. Then you go throw them out there at high speed and all falls apart. There's a massive difference in that, and I think this is one of the things we need to understand even better is what's going on at high speed beyond what's going on at low speed or static speeds. Another area is because of specific sport adaptation. If you worked with high-level footballers, again, soccer, they have an open leg pattern because they're used to the ball and movement in a 360 situation. When they go to run, you often see that rotation in the running style. They don't convert to a more linear pattern or a more, let's say, call it a correct speed pattern. They keep that, and there's lots of rotations. You see it in field hockey, you see it in lacrosse, you see it in sports, especially the sports with a lot of rotation. And they develop that. If they start at a young age, they develop that really early. And then the last thing is sometimes that problem is structural. It could be a leg length discrepancy, a reason that putting extra rotation on the hip. Now, for a number of reasons, somebody's got a little bit too much rotation and you're trying to work on that. Again, it's a pretty straightforward thing. Now we're not talking about gravity. What is the force that's working against rotation here? If you answer, yeah, it's centrifugal, right? You're creating that rotation. You're driving, if that leg is open on that first plant stage, well, then this has to counterbalance and counterbalance and counterbalance. And so now we want to work against that rotation movement. And the piece, again, to use that for rotations and posture is the Exigent top. Again, you'll start. If someone doesn't know what good rotation feels or no rotation feels like, we're going to stabilize them. And the interesting part is, I normally ask a question of this, but we start with an assistive load. And an assistive load for rotation is a load that stabilizes the middle. Either putting a load right down the middle, like that, or putting the loads on the side with the belly in the center. When you center the belly or stabilize the belly, it actually stops the body from rotating. And that's the loading pattern you see on the bottom, picture number 2. That's the assistive body, or assistive loading. So if a person puts on a bit of light load with the belly on the inside and they go and run, they're like, they'll walk right back and they'll say the same thing. I feel stable. It really just stabilizes me. I'm not twisting as much. Because now they have a force holding their core, that center rotation of the spine, in a more stable position. But again, they're not going to race with that, but they understand, and they'll come back and say, I feel more stable, which is the stability you're trying to do, because ultimately your trunk and torso are trying to stabilize so your arms and feet can move fast and as straight as possible, or express force as straight as possible in that straight line and not side to side. So the resistive load is the opposite. Take that load now, put that belly on the outside here. Now you have weight out here. And no matter how stable you are, there is some movement side to side. Now add a little bit of weight to that. What do you think happens? That little bit of loading literally tears that body side to side. And even the most stable athlete will struggle to try and keep straight with a load in a resistive position, okay? So again, you can put the assistive load on with the belly to the midline, which helps them feel stability, or you could put it on the outside or the lateral aspect, or, which is the resistive load because you're resisting rotations. Again, you will load, all these training blocks are about 4 weeks. One thing we've seen almost universally is we can see technical change in a permanent change in about 4 to 5 weeks on a skill issue or a technical issue. And that is, if you go in and you don't add load, you don't introduce wearable into it in that after that 4-week block, you'll already see the movement quality in the movement. They don't need to be tweaked, they don't need to be reminded, they don't need to be propriocepted or use PAP or anything else in the warm-up with the loading to stimulate that. You just ask them to go to their drills and the movement quality is already improved. And we've actually seen that in very high level competition. Those changes happen before, like in PC blocks or pre-competitive blocks before, like we saw it in the British Championships, we saw it in European Championships, and we saw it in the World Championships. 3 to 4 sessions per week, proximal, lateral, torso. Again, put it into your warm-up. If someone has a rotation issue, that rotation issue is there while they're doing their skip drills. So get them working on it immediately. Then again, put into your main session. About 3 times a week, different parts of the session. It could be in their acceleration phase, could be in their top speed phase, could be in a transition phase, could be in an endurance, could be just working on striding. You pick your sessions that you want to work on, and I can't tell you that right now. You might find other ones work better for you. And it could be just in the general speed work you're doing 2 to 3 times a week with like footballers or American football players or lacrosse people. The 70 and 150 rule still applies. And again, focus on movement quality. Oh, this one came up. Again, Jonathan, another one of the sprinters I worked with out here for a long time. He's a 10-3-ish sprinter, a SEA Games champion 4x1. A good top-level elite regional sprinter. Now you see him, again, on the track loaded. And that load is ripping his rotations. It's not comfortable.
Do you think we've got the weight in the right position? Does it feel like it's making you focus on not rotating? How does it feel?
Yeah, it works.
It works. What do you feel like exactly?
I want to rotate it. I can feel the weight.
It's pulling you back, or it's working okay. Cool. And it's just enough to be making you work a little harder too.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you want to keep it in this position, you think?
Yeah.
All right. So what we did is we staggered the load even here, a little bit more to the rear, specifically for that counter rotation.
So again, you can tell him, he said, I could feel it. He goes, it works. It's doing exactly that. The load is pulling me to the side. You know, I'm interpreting that. We had him, Jonathan speaks English a bit. He's from the beautiful island of Borneo, part of Malaysia. But what we can see is we're putting solutions into the sprint and the track work. And you take that off, that body stabilizes really quick. Let's keep moving on. Hip engagement. One sec, folks. Okay, so the next one is hip engagement, a standard one. And this one's a really big one. So those posture issues and the torso issues, they're really important for speed athletes, like track and field athletes. But once you start getting into like field sport athletes, hip engagement, early quick acceleration, you know, this is people that are really interested in that first 0 to 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 meter speed. And for a lot of them, they've never really learned how to create that piston action, how to drive those knees up, or haven't developed those muscles specifically for that. So this, for those of you working with team sport athletes and field sport athletes, even on a basketball court, if you've done it for long enough, you know this issue. So pay attention on that one. And the problem is often you've got that, like I said, you've got that poor early acceleration mechanics, poor transition phase from that to high speed. They've got that reduced stride length, can't get that, basically they can't get that hip up fast enough. That high knee recovery, which is essential for a soft running pattern. And the specific muscle weakness is in the hip flexors and the abdominals. It's an anterior chain issue. Yes, it's a whole body issue, but let's just keep things simple for today. The solution, this area we work on in the shorts. You know, shorts is really the primary piece of compression shorts. And so what we're trying to do is, again, you can do resistive loading, or we only focus on resistive loading here. The assistive loading we've found is not so beneficial to this issue. The resistive loading makes a difference right away, both for proprioception or awareness and also solution. What I mean is this. Now in that photo you see another, this is a elite 100-meter sprinter, 10-3 sprinter, and you can see the load is specifically on the front of the thigh, right in this, up high, right in the thigh, okay? And what is it trying to do? It's trying to push that leg down. So you're gonna have to work to get that knee up. So if you want, you know, if you want high knee, high knee, high knee, high knee, no, that's not working. Where's our guy? High knee, high knee, high knee, high knee, high knee. That load's right there. Gravity's working that way. We're applying load, so muscle action has to work that way. So we're assisting gravity in this case. Straightforward, anterior chain, proximal to the hip. Now, if someone's not able to feel that, and the coach is saying, lift your knee, lift your knee, lift your knee. This is where you can use the resistive load to actually make them away, make the problem worse. And then they understand that not only are they not lifting the knee, now you've made it even worse. So put that load on that hip or that thigh, not much, 100, 200 grams, and say, I want you to get in the block, accelerate out. Could be a football player out of a three-point stand. Could be a short corner defender coming out from hockey or soccer, whatever it is. But from a static start, accelerate out for 10, 20 meters with a load in that position. And they're gonna come back right away and they're gonna say, oh my God, I can't even lift my legs up. I said, yeah, well, that's what you look like normally. Now it's only worse. And then take that weight off. Ask them to do the exact same thing. And all of a sudden, pop, 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 pop. That leg is gonna feel light. Those muscles are engaged, they're firing, the flexors are engaged, and that leg's gonna come up and they're gonna come back and say to you, oh, that's what you mean by high knee. I get it, I really felt that. But remember, that was a stimulus from the load. It's not part of the neural pattern yet. There's no muscle memory on that yet. So now we have to train them to create that, to make that muscle stronger. But you've made them aware of the issue. Because you say, can you repeat that? And they'll try, but actually they can't because they still haven't developed. Part of the issue might have been that, might have been awareness, but there's probably some weakness in there, especially at high speed. And if you add fatigue in there, like a footballer after 70, 80, 90 minutes of play, then it's an endurance fatigue issue. So we focus on the Exigent compression shorts. We put a bit of resistive loading on-off it, just like you said in a potentiation trial. Let them become aware of why their legs, the heaviness is how they look, what lightness feels like, and then start working on your 3 to 4 week training block where you put the load into that position on the hip and train them in it, resist the movement. Same things, get it into the warm-up right off the bat, 50% of their main session or the training drills loaded. Start light, in the middle, put in the load, at the end, finish light. And then 70-150 rule applies. And what you can do, what's interesting with this one and what we recommend also, different from some of the others, because that hip flexor is a muscle that might be generally weak. And this is where we might have to go back to the conditioning center and put them on the ground and get them loading into your core work, you know, your cycling exercises. But I mean cycling, your leg cycling, your core, your plank, different exercise that puts stress on the hip flexor. Put the load with the shorts on them during those activities and add supplemental core, pelvis, and flexor conditioning. So just, if you think they need more than just the high speed conditioning on the track. If their general strength in those areas weak, you can actually, this is one of those areas we take and say, just use Exigent as a resistance tool in some of those floor-based exercises to add a specific load to really help build up that endurance. Some of them might not be ready to throw it into the track or into the field. And if your conditioning specialist has been around, you'll be able to see that, you'll know that. If you see them struggling on the track and say, why don't we spend a couple of weeks getting those muscles specifically strong with some light load first? Okay, let's look at that in action.
Yep. So again, as we're here, there's no rotations on him either, right?
No.
Okay. We're gonna keep, we're gonna put that bulk.
This is a big, strong guy. He's about 78, 80 kilo sprinter. Part of the 4x1
and then,
gold
yeah,
medal
just before you go, strap up.
So now he's loaded for his first acceleration. You can see how slow that leg dragged out. These are 70s, 5x70.
Yeah, Dennis, you can see that he's actually working harder.
Yeah.
So which is the idea of what we want him to do.
Yeah.
And then hopefully when we unload him, he'll keep that work rate going.
Right. So now we're gonna.
Okay, so that's Coach Robert Ballard. Rob Ballard, for those of you know in this region, he was the IAAF technical director for track and field for Southeast Asia. He's an Australian Olympic 400-meter runner, a very good technical sprint coach, and he's one of the guys that I spent a lot of time with in the start, really looking at speed and speed mechanics with Exigent. And these videos are from 4 years ago. We spent 2014, 15, 16 working together, and now he's working with us in tennis and a few other areas. But a very high-level technical coach. And if you notice, what we're doing is Exigent's being tweaked in their movements considerably. So and you'll actually see Rob walking around with loads in hand. And this is a very typical coaching situation. He'll throw a load on for a drill, have him do it, then he'll take the load off because he wants to tweak and remind them. And that's when things get pretty technical. But that first run, he ran with the load on. This next run, Neeraj is unloaded, and he's had 2 or 3 runs with it unloaded. So now we're looking to see an improvement in movement, not just the hard work.
Yeah. And then hopefully when we unload him, he'll keep that work rate going.
Right. So now we're going to.
That's big.
Good one.
Yeah.
And Neeraj?
Neeraj, yeah, pretty good. He just started to overstride him technically.
Yeah.
Worked really nicely. So I think he tried to carry it through too far.
Yeah, yeah.
So drive face was good.
Yeah, I actually saw that. It looked really strong.
Yeah, and it's just that he tried to keep on carrying it forward. He's got to then transition properly into the running action.
And again, that's really interesting. It's highly technical stuff. It's going straight to the root of the problem. We're not just saying things like, oh, he looked more power, he looked more strength, which is kind of a weight training terminology. Like you said, the dry face was good, and that's what we were working on. But then all of a sudden, when he had that load off, now he was overstriding because the legs were light, so he had to transition that. And that's why we say, don't tweak it once or twice. You need time, and anybody who's working on speed or speed mechanics at a high level knows it takes a while. So that's why we're saying, put it into those training blocks. Don't load all the time. Don't make it your only tool. Allow them always to reconnect so that they're able to make the adjustments, because there's several phases in any speed, whether it's from start to early acceleration, transition, top speed, and it applies in a football sitting just as much as it does in a sprint setting. So they need time to adjust to that, and the load will have an effect, but there's a counter that needs to happen as well. Nope. Okay, so the last big one we're looking now is overstriding. Overstriding comes to us a lot. We work with a lot of people around the world on this, not only in sprinting and speed, but in running. As you know, some of you know us, we do a lot of work with Ironman triathletes, and we're now getting into the marathon space with some very high-level people, and looking at striding and good posture and technique is really important for efficiency. So for those of you who might be working in the endurance space, running, and not just full speed, all these technical aspects to putting wearable into training can still apply. The biggest problem with overstriding, again, is generally you see a specific weakness. It could be the glute and ham, could be poor posture that creates it. Some people, it's poor technique. A lot of young kids learn that long style. They think that's what sprinters look like, and they start doing it. And those are bad habits learned young or reinforced maybe with coaches who might have been striving for something that wasn't really what was needed. And then sometimes you get a bouncy athlete. You get really explosive toe-based athletes, and they'll overstride just because they're flying along. Solution, again, for striding issues, we recommend using the calf sleeves. Get into the shank, get into the lower body, and we can affect that very quickly. You're going to contrast resistive and assistive loading again. 1 or 2 sessions on-off of PAP, do that potentiation work where you load at the back of the leg for overstriding, at the front of the leg for understriding. And it's a very simple thing again. All right, here's our body. If you want overstriding, means that leg goes too far in front, okay, for a number of issues. So ultimately, we want that leg to pull down early. A load on the back of the leg, what it does, it literally, as that leg accelerates through, gravity's working on that load and that whole shank, and a small amount of load change at high speed, gravity starts pulling on that very quickly, and it becomes almost impossible to stretch that leg out because gravity pulls it down early. So it gets them to come into that position and what we can call a more ideal stride length rather than let that leg stay out there for days. So for overstriding, load at the posterior chain, just like you see in Jonathan's calves there. For understriding, it's the opposite. Load in the front of the leg. When that leg slings through, it's like a kick. Now that extra load carries that momentum out front. It pulls that person out. So if you're trying to teach an athlete, you got to open up your stride, man, and they don't even know what it feels like. Put a small load on the front of that shaft of the foot, and that leg's going to get flung out in front. And right off the bat, they're going to say, oh, that's what it feels like. That's what you're looking for. Take the load off and say, yeah, can you repeat that? Now you know what the feeling is. Remember, the load is creating a feeling that up to this point before, we didn't have a cue for. It was either extrinsic, you were telling them to feel it, or you were grabbing their leg and forcing them to feel it in a standing situation and hoping some way it transitioned into their movement. Or you put a cord on them and you had them rod at an overspeed, and then they were battling the equipment. So all have their place. Just think about it that way. So again, resistive loading is the ultimate goal. That load is going to pull them down and stop the overstride. So what we're going to do now is, like I said, you're going to put into your 3 to 4 week training block, 3 to 4 sessions per week. And why I say 3 to 4, just so everybody knows, is it's alternate days, right? We have a lot of athletes and coaches using Exigent every day, but they use it maybe in different areas, or they'll use it very lightly for technique work, but not overstressing the athlete. Speed work tends to be pretty high stress. So we say like weight training, 135, 246, 135 Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Give those alternate days, especially at the start, because you also want to see its role in the joints. Athletes may not feel it in the muscle during the session, but trust me, your joints are feeling it. And that's where the high level injury resistance work can come, because you're not only putting a high speed emphasis stress on the body for performance, you're stressing the joint, which means you're creating a high speed or a stress situation on the joint at high speed, which ultimately is going to help develop stability if it's done progressively. And we're still looking at it, but there's a lot of people who think it could be a real injury solution in specific strengthening for joint stability and eccentric concentric movements where a lot of injuries happen. Again, progressing smartly. 70-50 rule, load the warm-up drills, 50% of the session, and don't supplement core exercises. I should have taken that part out. So let's look at overstriding actually on the track.
Yeah, so like I said, we're not gonna, 200 grams is a load. That's a lot of weight. And we're gonna try and keep it a bit neutral. So we're loading proximal. We want to keep that weight right up behind the knee so that he doesn't feel the heaviness down low, and there's a faster turnaround on that contact. So he's got 200 grams, and for 70 meters full sprint, that's a heck of a load.
That was just his first trial running out.
What are you saying, Coach?
It looks a lot better than what he has been doing, because he has a tendency to flick that leg out and want to land over there when he accelerates.
Yep.
By putting that weight there, it appears as though what's happening, he's able to hold it there.
Yep.
And get his body, his hips over the line better. So I'm hoping that this can...
You can see that now just with that 200.
With that, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Oh, let's go back. Show that one again. How do we press play?
Yeah, so like I said, we're not gonna. What is?
Okay, just. I think there's one more run. Yeah, here we go. That's unloaded now.
What did you see?
It was funny. I think with Jonathan, he's all of a sudden he's had all his power. He didn't know what to do with his legs.
Yeah.
So I'll be interested to see how he transitions in the third one.
On the third.
And again, what's really exciting for me when I first started working with all these coaches and programs around the world with Exigent was we were having technical, skill, performance-based discussions. We weren't talking to conditioning guys saying, oh yeah, that exercise hard, or they really have to use force. So our traditional terminology from sort of our ground-based strength training or general traditional methods, I keep using the word traditional, it's a different terminology. And if you notice the coach is actually holding, again, those weights in his hand, it's common to see people interacting with the product and the gear on a regular basis, tweak on, tweak off. Think of that wheel weight. Okay. And understriding, okay, so understriding doesn't happen a lot, but I'll just quickly walk through that. The photo doesn't apply there. It's the load on the front of the leg, which I mentioned, the anterior shank, or right over the tibialis anterior. Poor technique, bad habits. But one thing, we do see that sometimes that short, especially in footballers, tight anterior chain and pelvis, where they get those really short patterns and they don't know how to open up. And also an injury. If somebody's had an injury in their hip, their groin, they tend to not open up their stride. So a previous injury sometimes can cause an understriding issue as well. Calf sleeves, use the contrast of resistive and assistive loading. All the same rules still apply. The only difference is you're putting the load on the front of that leg, right in here, as compared to the back. So lastly, to wrap up, is just a couple of things from the periodization side, taking a look at your four main laws that apply to loading. Individualization. If the load feels wrong, reload it. A small tweak or position change is fine. Your athletes will tell, they won't even tell you, they'll just change it themselves. Remember, you should feel challenged, but not compromised, or it shouldn't feel wrong. And it takes one session to know where the load fits for every person, for every movement. Also, two athletes doing the same drill, it's very often that what we'll do is we'll be running a drill, two guys wearing the shorts, one guy will be loading in the hamstrings, the other one will be loading in the hip flexor. They might have their own issue, and let them load that. Or we'll control the amount of load, like it's 200 grams today, guys, and they'll control where they put it, depending on their specific issue. So like I said, that's the whole idea. I spent so much time, 17 years developing it, was so they could be individualized. Don't just put a generic solution in. Let the athlete guide the process, because you may think you know, but they feel it. Okay, so make sure you're in that conversation with them, and it's a great communication tool with coach and athlete. Also, injury status. Don't load somebody who's injured unless you're actually using it as part of their injury and recovery training. Return to play is a huge area we're doing, especially with speed athletes around the knee, but that's not the topic of today. 2, specificity. Speed athletes, 100%. Reduce the load, not the speed. If you throw a bunch of load on these guys and all of a sudden it becomes like pulling a sled or a heavy weight vest, you've missed the whole point. They should be training at or near the speed for that session. And once you drop below that, you're not working speed anymore, okay? Again, make sure they're challenged, not compromised in quality or speed. And we're talking 50 grams or 100 grams is a difference. If you put 200 grams on and you're holding that in your hand and you're saying that's light, he should be fine, but you're watching them and they're not. And leave ego aside, go to 100 grams. Progressive overload, again, progressing kilos, not grams. None of those athletes you saw even had a kilo of weight on. And those are 75 to 80 kilo, 100-meter sprinters. These guys can squat through the roof, they can jump the moon. You know, they're strong and they're powerful, but small loads make a big difference at high speed. And progressions are only 1 to 200 grams every 2 weeks. Okay, and there's our basic loading progressions, which apply for sport and athletes almost across the board, be it basketball, be it tennis, be it males, be it females. It doesn't matter. Start with those. And when they put it on, it's well designed. When they put it on, it's going to have a comfort that they've never experienced before. So when they put that load on, they're going to say, I don't feel it. Let them finish the workout, let them get to tomorrow, let them see how they feel before you decide whether it had an impact. Because we've had this time again with some of the best people in the world. They say, yeah, I didn't feel it, so I loaded up. And I was like, no, I told you not to. I told you that was going to happen. And then they say, yeah, you're right. Like, I can't even walk today. My hamstrings are screaming. So high-speed load, high-speed light load is strenuous on the body. Start smart. Last one, overtraining, listen to your body. Alternate days, light sessions, start light, finish light. Never load as a high-speed session more than 50% of the training session. Focus on movement quality. Unload it if you see it being compromised. you lose nothing by taking the load off. You know, we're not in those days anymore where we just flog athletes. And it's not that kind of, let's do 10 more, let's try another rep. It's about movement quality. And so remember, fatigue is your guide as well. If the nervous system's fatigued, if you're doing BMS or some type of explosive analysis at the start of a training session and you notice some nervous system volatility or reduction at the beginning of the session, don't load that day. You know, again, listen to your body, be smart. That wraps it up, folks. That's the end of our sprint workshop on wearable resistance, focusing on 5 major issues. Like I said at the beginning, this was not a technical education session on the intricacies of sprinting and speed. I'll leave that to you, the experts, to figure that out. What our expertise in is taking the technology of wearable resistance and providing guidelines for you to start introducing it with your athletes. Remembering a couple of key things. It's just weight training. Weight training works, but you want to be smart. If you're unsure how to load at the start, just load light. We haven't had a program yet where a coach hasn't figured out what to do with this stuff in a week or 2. If you see something here and it wasn't, once you start and you discover something else, go with it, as long as you follow those progressions. It's a long-term tool. But what's really important, why we started with technical issues and not just conditioning, is work on technical issues first. We can work on power. We can work on specific endurance. We can work on speed. We can work on things related to neuromuscular output. But it's better we work on technical issues first before you start throwing in just more force and making a technical issue worse. Because as you know, you'll get better improvement from quality of movement and speed training than will just in pure force production. So that wraps it up. I hope that helped. We're going to have a short question and answer period now. We're going to open that up. And as always, you can reach out to us at our LILA address. And hopefully you enjoyed the talk.